Thank you very much for coming this evening. It gives me great pleasure to be here with you all and to welcome the fantastic wizards from Weta, the incredible Joe LETTERI and Dan Lemon. Thank you. In place of the moderator, you got me this evening, I'm afraid, so I'll do my very, very best. But it's fantastic to have you guys here, and I think a good place to start might be, we've all worked together for many, many years on many projects. We go back to Lord of the Rings days and King Kong and all manner of projects down in New Zealand. And when we came to start working on this trilogy of films, culminating in this one, for me, it all started with Joe sending me the script and it being one of the most powerful scripts I think I've read in ages, which it was so the incredible arc of this ape that grew up from being an orphan to a revolutionary leader, and it was an extraordinary journey, the first film. Throughout the course of the 3 movies, it's changed and developed, and the techniques have changed and developed slightly, but I'm going to pass over to you guys really to talk about, why don't we start with the growth through the three movies, starting off with Rise, through Dawn, through what we just witnessed tonight.
Well, even starting with the performance, because, like you said, we worked together a long time going back to Gollum, and what I remember is that we would have these incredible long conversations about character development, because we really just love the idea of being able to work with Andy, just to bring that acting to the character. CG characters are hard enough to bring to the screen anyway when you're focusing on the realism and everything else that you need to do to get them to be believable in the film. But really you want that heart and soul. And we had so many discussions about that, about Gollum during Lord of the Ring, what was going on with him, what were you thinking as you were hitting each of the scenes, so that we had some idea of what it was we were trying to extract and bring to the screen. And King Kong was the same way, and that's why when I read the script for this film when Fox sent it to me, I thought there's really no one else who can do this and do it justice other than Andy. And
that was one of the big challenges with this franchise, is figuring out how to take some of the tools that we'd used before on Lord of the Rings and King Kong, sort of the performance capture tools that previously had sort of been confined to a dedicated soundstage, and figure out how we take those tools out onto film locations, onto the set, and get somebody like yourself in the environment with the rest of the actors and the director and all the people that collaborate to make a movie, and be able to capture what you're doing there in front of the traditional filmmaking process.
Yeah, let me make one point about that before you carry on, Dan, is when we started doing this with Gollum, it was a bit of a science project. Right, Andy was in there, working with the other actors. In fact, you'd been hired just to do the voice, right? Essentially.
Yeah, originally,
yeah. Yeah, exactly. But Andy threw himself into the scenes with the other actors, and it really made the scenes come alive, the interaction and everything else that was happening. So when Peter turned the stuff over to us and said, "Okay, now you have to make Gollum," we kept looking at Andy's performance and said it would be crazy to not use this. So we asked Andy if he would come back and essentially redo the performances. And we set up this motion capture stage, and Andy did it, and we got Peter to direct it. And we carried on that way through the Lord of the Rings films, through King Kong. Everything we were doing, Tintin, we did that way. And when it came time to do this film, what I really wanted to be able to do is to go to Andy and say, this time we're not going to ask you to do it again. We want exactly what you're doing in the moment to be what's on the film. So that's what Dan is talking about.
Yeah, and that certainly, probably helped you in only having to get into that space, the one time in front of the, on the set, and to be able to do that with the other actors involved as well while we're filming them and capturing it live. And it helped us as well, and I think it helped the other actors as well, because they were performing, with you and reacting to you, and you were reacting to them, and that was the scene that we then put into the movie. We just made you look like a monkey.
Yeah, the crews were a little unsure about it at first, right? Because suddenly, you know, we're showing up with this whole new department that no one's ever heard about and just saying, excuse us guys, we've got to put some cameras here and some lights here, and they're all saying, you think, really? Who are you guys? But, you know, after 3 films, I think everyone kind of got the idea and settled into it. Yeah.
Can you talk about the sort of because on Rise, basically a lot of the first film were interiors. You know, we were shooting in sets. The house that Caesar was brought up in, the facility where all the other apes were, and the laboratory and so on and so forth. There was one big set which was the San Francisco Bridge, not that many exteriors, and then the second film was a completely different story, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. The first one allowed us to get our feet wet with this idea of, you know, doing performance capture on stage, as I mentioned, integrating with the crews, just learning how to work that way, and making sure that, you know, everyone was comfortable with this fitting in to the whole situation. It was all new, and venturing out into relatively benign environments. You know, a lot of sunshine, nothing really wild. On the second film, when Matt Reeves came in, Matt really wanted to show the apes kind of now out on their own and starting to form their own community, and that's when we had to really take it some places that started to get a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, I think for us, for the first film, it was just getting everything to work. Like, we were literally soldering up LEDs with speaker wire and gaffer tape on the sides and taping them onto your body. And they weren't particularly robust, especially when we had stunts and, you know, people rolling around and kind of, you know, scraping against them. So one of the big challenges with the second film was to make all the gear robust enough so we could take it out into the elements, let it get wet, let it get cold, let it get hot, and you know, shoot these scenes in a rainforest in Canada in heavier conditions and have it all work.
And you have to know, Andy throws himself into these scenes, so he destroys gear.
And then for this film, I mean, it was taken that next step further, really, wasn't it, in terms of conditions? I mean, as you can see, there was a lot of it was pretty cold. A lot of it was shot outdoors at, you know, the night shoot. I remember particularly doing night shoots in a very skimpy, you know, unitard, in minus conditions at 5 o'clock in the morning, and, you know, with all this gear, and it was a challenge for everybody, wasn't it? I mean,
well, it was crazy too, because there was never enough rain for Matt. You'd be out there in the pouring rain and the snow, like he's at 5 in the morning, and they'd be bringing out rain bars. Yeah,
It was tough. I guess one of the things that was really interesting in terms of like the evolution of the process from one film to the next was your performance. Like, we actually, on this last movie, you were making faces that we'd never seen before on Caesar. You know, even after 2 films before, trying to build the character and get the rig all set up so that it could, you know, do every kind of bit of performance that you were doing. I'm just curious, you know, from your perspective, what was different about this film, and you know, where you went to emotionally that was a new place for Caesar?
Well, I mean, this film was, you know, perhaps the most. It's interesting because in the first film it was very physically challenging playing. I mean, for a start, getting to play an ape all the way from sort of infancy through the whole course of a life was perhaps the most thrilling experience I've ever had as an actor. Really, to have that arc, to have the arc of 3 films to play with in that detail and that way, but and see him not only change as a character, but also to see him change evolutionarily. So you know, in the first film, he was very pure chimpanzee. He starts off as pure chimpanzee, and then the ALZ drug kicks in, and then he starts to, you know, to transform and grow and become slightly more human-like. And you get to see him utter a few words in that first film. In the second, he's now the founding father of a movement. He is also literally a father of a family, a leader of a group of apes that he's trying to lead. And keep free and safe in their own community. And then this third film, of course, they're at the brink of war. They are in the middle of war. We find them in the middle of war, and Caesar suffers this terrible personal loss, which drives him into a journey of revenge and hatred. And all the time he's becoming more human-like. So that was, and I think really there was so much study in the first films, you know, looking at chimpanzees very closely and emulating chimp behavior, but ultimately it's you know, it's a character, and of course it's a human character. Really, I always approached Caesar as a human in an ape's skin. He was an outsider, always an outsider. He was brought up with human beings, but actually didn't know what it was to be ape, and then discovering that. And then in this film, in a way, as he's becoming literally, physically, and emotionally, and psychologically more human-like, yet contradicting that is this terrible animal rage and desire for revenge, and perhaps in the most animalistic and base, raw way. And so that was you know, and so what you're talking about is interesting, and also of course in this film Caesar speaks a lot more. So it was, how do we make this dialogue work, which doesn't sound like, you know, a human in a monkey suit. You know, it's how do you really make an ape sound like it's an ape talking. In the second film, when we started, again, he started to have more dialogue, I used mouth guards, didn't I, to stop me from forming the words fully, so that Caesar was always searching for a way of expressing them. The words were driven by kind of energetic, emotional responses to things. So, but in this, he was much more reflective and thoughtful in the way he spoke, and constructed longer sentences, and was saying more. You know, he was more eloquent, kind of linguistically. So that was another journey as well, which you guys then had to deal with, you know, on the back end.
Yeah, that was something that we actually had the advantage of working through 3 films on, because remember the first film was pretty much all pantomime, sign language, and gesture, and you know those few surprise words at the end. And as you mentioned, in the second film, you know, even at the story phase and the writing phase, there were a lot of discussions about how much can the apes talk, because you knew at least 50% of the film was going to be the ape story, but you couldn't, it was too soon to introduce that kind of talking. You know, 15 years wasn't enough, so that idea of really, you know, searching, as you mentioned, forming the thoughts and trying to figure out a way to get them out, really kind of came to the fruition in the third film, where we kind of knew how to do that, to express it in a way that did feel naturally believable, because apes aren't built to talk. So we had to come up with a way of making them form, you know, words that look believable, as you said, without looking, you know, like a human. And some of that was in the design. We made slight modifications to Caesar's design, especially the muzzle shapes, that were close enough to an ape that hopefully nobody noticed, but they're there to allow us to you know, make the performance more believable.
Yeah, we're always sneaking little bits of Andy Serkis face into Caesar. That's kind of one of the things that's so great about this franchise, is we got to come back to this character that we love, you know, over a space of, I guess it was about 8 years, and continue to kind of refine and make adjustments and changes. And it's interesting when, you know, you do the best that you can on each project, but you always get to the end of it and, okay, next time I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to improve in this way. And at the same time, the technology marches forward as well. And so one of the great things in this last film is we've been able to take all the advances that we've made in terms of, you know, our physical simulations of how light moves through the world, and our new kind of ray tracing renderer, and all of the advances we've made in growing environments. We're now using a simulator that actually grows whole ecosystems rather than placing a tree at a time, and creating digital environments that are, you know, more believable than ever before. And these are all things that, you know, we're constantly, it's just getting excited about being able to take these and put these into the apes world.
Yeah, just to take a step back, when we started the first film, there was some discussion about how do we create the apes. Would we do any kind of prosthetics or people in suits? And we opted to not do that. We knew that from the beginning we needed to create apes that were fully digital and to be believable, because that's what the story required. You know, the film opens with a scene of the apes out in the jungle, you know, where the poachers attack them. And we wanted that to feel like a documentary. And there's a couple of close-ups, you know, of the apes where they're responding to the sounds. And that was necessary for the story, because they start as you know, present-day apes as we know them, and they had to evolve throughout the course of the story. So we have to proceed from that basis of carrying it, you know, onward and onward. It's just that every time there was a new film, someone would push the camera in a little bit closer and hold it a little bit longer. And you know, this third film, Matt Reeves, our director, just told it in really incredibly long close-ups, because so much of the story was kind of like, you know, an inner monologue. Yeah.
It'd be quite interesting to talk about the process from getting from the stage or the location to to what we finally see. Just sort of from the performance perspective. So we're on set, and there are all the actors playing apes, and then there are all the actors playing humans, and myself and Woody, for instance, in this film, play the scenes opposite each other. And then what Matt Reeves would do, our director, we'd hone the scenes, we'd work on them. He'd never put the camera down anywhere and start shooting anything until we'd rehearsed and we were finding what the core, the emotional core of the scene was. So it's exactly the same as shooting any live action film, regardless of the fact you're wearing a head-mounted camera and you've got dots all over your face and wearing a unitard. As far as acting is concerned, you are in the scene with the other actor who with Woody, for instance, so you're shooting it very, very conventionally, and you're shooting the performance of Woody, and then reversing on sort of performance of Caesar. And then that gets put into the cut, and that is what Matt, the director, lives with in the cut for months and months and months before, meanwhile, and I'm going to pass over to you, but the point being, the story, the sort of the drama, if you like, is crafted using the actors' faces and the actors' performances as the baseline for the emotion. The drama has to work. Absolutely before any visual effects arrive on screen, and then meanwhile.
Well, that's actually one of the reasons why we wanted to craft this idea too of doing performance capture live, because on visual effects films up until then, you'd have some sort of a stand-in like a tennis ball or something. Or you might even have an actor like we did on Lord of the Rings. You'd have Andy in there doing his piece, but then you had to pull him out and do what we call a clean pass because you need to have nothing there to paint. Well, that pass inevitably, like the camera operator would say, try to do the same move, and the actors would try to pantomime the same moves, but it never was as good as when Andy was actually in camera. And so you're constantly fighting to get that feeling back. Where if you're doing it live in camera with the actors, everything is just there. The camera operator, the moves are exactly where you want them to be, the focus is where you want it to be, the lighting is where you want it to be. The editors can see this and start building their cut. They're not guessing on, well, how long is this tennis ball going to be on screen? The same thing even with, Michael Giacchino's talking about when he was scoring it. Most of what he scored to was Andy, because we don't get this stuff done until a few weeks before it goes out, so they don't have much to work with, and so that was really the thing that we thought would help the filmmaking process the most, is to have something there that was as close to live action as possible. And then we start with the idea of taking our characters, and in the background we're doing things like building a skeleton. We build a muscle system for the apes so that the physiology is correct. We have a fur system where it's almost like hand punching, hair. Every hair is placed, and there's millions of them on an ape, and they're all simulated as well. Their interaction with rain, interaction with snow, interaction with lighting, because we've got to mimic cinematography. How light hits the eyes and how you capture that on screen in the camera. Any process that happens in the real world, we have to recreate and mimic in the digital world to give you that level of believability. Because ultimately what we're after is to make it look like, well, when we shot this movie, there were apes there.
Just getting back to the cut real quick, because I think the cut is actually a really interesting place to look at the movie. And the way Matt cuts his films as well, he's intimately involved with the editors. He's sitting in the room with them every day as they're cutting those pieces. And he's crafting that story, there in the edit, and he's making decisions about mood and pacing and tone, and that's all kind of keying off of what the actors are doing. They're in their gray suits with their funny boom mics and all the dots on their face. But he's watching that, and you might blink at a certain point, or you might have a little twitch on your cheek, and he goes through every take, and he makes those selections of that performance and builds that scene that way. So one of the questions we sometimes get is, well, how much of Andy Serkis' performance do you change? And for us, that would be death. The story is working, really well in that cut. and it functions completely based on what you were doing with Woody Harrelson there on the day. And if we start to embellish that or make alterations to it, suddenly we're in uncharted territory, and that cut would start to fall apart. And like sometimes people ask, well, surely you add tears or that sort of thing. I can tell you, in that movie, every tear that you see Caesar cry, Andy shed on set. Aww. And that's not always true even of the human characters in movies. We're often adding tears to the humans.
Should we open up some questions to the audience? Yeah.
Hi, AJ Billions. Just want to say for these. Hi. AJ Billions. Well, thanks for coming out, you guys, first of all. But just to have these two gentlemen talk so highly about you, that they kind of basically built this film off of your performances because you're so good at what you do. Like, what's like the defining, I guess, part of your career where you feel like you had your big break, so to speak, where you were actually able to get to places like this where you have people that are actually building franchises off of your ability?
Well, I mean, of course, it does for this method of work. This total experience came from Lord of the Rings, and as Joe was saying, at that time it really was a science project. It really was not defined as a modus operandi for working, and we were really feeling our way with it. I mean, motion capture had been, or was beginning to be used. Robert Zemeckis was making Polar Express at the same time, but in terms of photo-real characters, you know, and the notion of acting being exactly the same, whether you're in a performance capture suit or you know, wearing a costume and makeup, not being any different. I mean, that really sort of was crystallized for me in that, you know, with that experience, being on set, acting with those other actors, and what the journey that we've all been on together. The extraordinary thing that we've all realised is that, and especially going on from, say, something like The Lord of the Rings to King Kong, is that it is all about intimacy at the end of the day, and about looking into the character's eyes and therefore into the soul of the character. And so whether it's a 25-foot gorilla or whatever it is, any creature, I mean, it's got to the point now where performance can be cued by what an actor does, regardless of how it's finally manifested on screen, or how obscure or abstract even. You know, I'm always looking now for opportunities to create characters which, even if you know, you can. Even if the face is only part of it, you know, sort of hybrid ways of bringing other, you know, like Smorg in that Benedict Cumberbatch played in The Hobbit, you know, was cued off his performance. Now he's not, you know, he's not a 150-foot long dragon, but you know, he gives you the sense and the soul and the feeling and you believe that is alive, that character, because it's cued off an actor's performance, which is in the moment and acting opposite another actor, Martin Freeman in that case, in those scenes. So for me, it was a real epiphany for this incredible tool, this 21st century tool that enables through the incredible work that these guys do, for an actor to sink into the mindset or body or soul of anything now, and that's possible.
I think that Gollum character in particular was a watershed moment for a number of reasons. I mean, technologically, we were just getting our skin, you know, starting to look like real skin, and that was something that, you know, Joe and some of the other shader writers at our company had worked really hard on. And you know, finally, you had a character that actually didn't look like they were made of like ceramic or clay, but actually looked like it was skin. So that sort of level of your suspension of disbelief didn't have to work quite so hard to buy the character. But then also emotionally, facially, I think that was one of the first times when you had a character that was that engaging and surprising, and I think that's, you know, testament to the performance you gave, and also to the animators and the guys that built the facial rig, that we could actually start to match what you were doing on set with a digital character, which, you know, takes a lot of skill and effort on the artist's part.
Yeah, he was a very human-like character, and we knew that he was going to have to stand in scenes with real actors, and that was really the first time we sort of figured that out. But I have to say, what I learned from that is again, looking at what Andy does, Because if I go back to the first film, Rise, you know, you're always looking at how do you know that you've got the character working? And there was a shot in there that was actually in the trailer where Caesar's in the facility, he decides he's gonna stay, and he's watching, you know, the guards kind of walk by him. Just a really small moment. But to me, when you can get a moment like that working, you know you've got the character. You know, the big bombastic moments are in a way easy. It's the small, quiet moments. And to me, that's what I really enjoyed about this film is, as I said before, a lot of this film was just told in those kinds of moments. Like, you know, as an actor, Andy's inviting you to get into what Caesar is doing and to understand that from the inside out.
I mean, it is incredible if you go back and look at Rise. I mean, it is. I watched it again recently, actually, with my kids, and just seeing the progression, the detail, the level of work that in the last 6 years, of the fidelity of, you know, the reality of the skin texture and the fur and the eyes now. I mean, it's beyond. This film is. I mean, Weta are absolutely, without doubt, the world leaders in this field, but it's also because you guys have all been working together, or we've all been working together, and so there's a you know, the skills are sort of passed along and nurtured, and it's an ethos, really, isn't it? It's definitely an ethos, a way of working that is very, very important to Weta, isn't it?
It builds, and you know, a lot of it is it's just in the details. Like on the second film, we had this wet environment, and we had to figure out, okay, how do you get rain looking believable, you know, on fur, and you got these droplets hitting the fur, and fur is incredibly complex. It's all these, like I said, small little fibers. And so in the third film, like for example, Matt wants snow, so we had to build on that. The characters are rolling around in the snow, and Dan came up with this great observation, which turned into a bit of software that we wrote that basically not only does the snow collect in globs on the fur, but then it melts and then refreezes. So we wrote software to do all that, and it's just something that you can do because you've got, you know, 3 films under our belt. We can kind of get into the detail that way.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah. I got a question for you, Andy. Known from the original Planet of the Apes movies, I know Roddy McDowell played Caesar, and then he also played Cornelius. Have you thought about, now that this trilogy's done, if there's any ideas left on the table? You know,
I've not thought about it at all, no.
Yeah.
Not once crossed my mind. Yeah, of course. I mean, look, I absolutely love this franchise. You know, it's been a joy working on these films, and I have been suffering the loss of Caesar. I've really been mourning the loss of not playing that character because you know, for years it's just like, well, where's he going next? You know, so it is. I mean, look, yeah, who knows what's going to happen in the future? But the great thing about performance capture is it does mean you can come back as someone else. You know?
And I think also just looking at your body of work, every character that you create is kind of singular and unique and totally different. And I remember when we were making, like, just getting started on Rise, and you know, Joe was sort of pitching the idea like we should really get Andy Serkis involved, and he's got experience in this medium, and he's also just a really talented actor. And everyone's like, oh yeah, like King Kong, you know, he can do the same thing again. He's like, no, he's not going to do the same thing again. Kong and Caesar couldn't be, you know, more different. And I think that's, I don't know, it's just amazing to see what you're able to do with the different decisions you make as an actor. The way you craft your characters, they're all so interesting and so distinct.
Yes.
I have to say, Andy, I think we've done 8 films together now, and I think this is the 3rd time I've had to kill you. And it's coming back.
My name is Samuel Sadovnik, and I just want to ask, what's your process into building a specific character?
What's my process? So, look, it always starts, no matter how far away the character is or seems, you know, whether it's otherworldly or a creature or, you know, Gollum, you know, from Middle-earth, it's always got to somehow connect to you as a human being. So you're not ever sort of, there is I mean, I like playing characters that are quite far away from me. There are certain actors who absolutely love playing characters that are versions of themselves. That's not me as an actor, and actors are, you know, sort of on a spectrum between that and becoming other. For me, it's very much about simultaneously creating a psychology, a background to the character, a physicality to the character, a voice to the character, emotional center to the character. You know, but it's like, well, what part of you connects with? I mean, for instance, in this film, what part of me connected with Caesar in this movie was the loss of family. What that must be like. How can you ever possibly forgive? You know, and so you're connecting with very real life emotions, despite the fact that you're playing an ape. I mean, and interestingly in this one, you know, as I was saying earlier, Caesar is becoming more human-like. But even when I mean, even starting off with Caesar, when he was a pure chimpanzee, as I was saying, I always thought of him like he was out of his own skin, like he was a human in an ape's skin. He was brought up with humans and therefore believed he was human until he discovered in his sort of teenage that in fact he almost sees himself for the first time. So you're always, and so the notion of being an outsider, you know, was crucial to understanding who Caesar was. And that's the same with any character, really. You know, you're finding where you link up with that, because there's, of course, apes is really us. You know, the apes are talking about the human condition, and so it would be foolish to just mimic an ape, because it's not about that at all. Actually, you know, yes, of course, it's like, you know, you have to learn to show the behaviour, but it's not about copying an ape. It's about how you bring the ape to you in this case.
Yeah, I do a lot of motion capture as well as performance capture and all this. And I remember first starting in this, and when the technology started to capture just the slightest nuances and all like this, I heard everyone saying, "Oh, that's it for actors. You're all done. The computer's going to be able to do it." And in fact, it's gone the opposite direction. You know, the technology and everything seems to be everything geared towards capturing those nuances that are strictly, you know, coming from a person live in the moment. And I get the same thing from this discussion that you're all having. So I was just wondering if you would speak to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, that was the intent. I love creating characters like this. I've always enjoyed it, but I'm not an actor. He is. So it's, you know, it's great to be able to pair up with it. I want to create that part that everyone says, hey, this is different. This is causing me to take a second look at it. But as Andy's saying, from the performance side, you need that as well. You need what actors bring to it. It's that pairing up that works. And that's absolutely why we created this and went that way.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways to make movies, and I worked on Jungle Book before this film, and that was more of a sort of traditional animation approach, where we had actors that were providing voices, and we would key off of them, but then it came down more to a team of animators to figure out what King Louie was going to do, and it was more of a collaboration. And that's, you know, that gives you a particular kind of movie with a particular kind of look. But for these movies, I think what was really important to the people that were making them, the filmmakers, and Andy touched on it as well, was that intimacy, that believability that what was happening in front of you was actually real. Maybe I know intellectually that monkeys don't talk and that, you know, that apes don't behave in this way, but emotionally, if I can get vested into it, and if I can believe that scene, then it can speak to me in a way that, you know, in an almost like fable kind of like way that and tell me something that is, you know, that connects with me. And I think that was, I know that for the director, Matt Reeves, that was one of the things that he would talk about a lot was, you know, he'd put on his headphones and he looked at the monitor while they were shooting the scene. And he, you know, we were talking about a process, and he's saying, like, when I do that, I'm just constantly asking myself the question, is this real? Do I believe it? Is, you know, is what's happening in front of me authentic? And that's the same process we go through in visual effects as well. We're not so much dealing with the, you know, everything right there at the moment that it's being shot, but once we get it back into post, we're constantly evaluating our characters. We'll put Andy's face up side by side with Caesar's face, and we'll review the shot that way, and we'll just compare frame for frame, you know, am I believing what Caesar's doing? And if not, what is it that's different about what Andy's doing that, you know, what is it that's connecting with me in Andy's performance that I'm not seeing on Caesar? One of the challenges, of course, is that Caesar's face is very different from Andy's, and there's certain things that we have to figure out how to do. Thankfully. We have to figure out how to get a particular emotion that Andy's making us feel and translate that to the ape anatomy, to the ape face. You know, like they've got this big muzzle and they've got, you know, their eyes are quite a bit deeper set in their sockets. There's certain things that we have to adjust, but at the end of the day, that authenticity is the thing that's so important.
Actually, it's very funny. I've got to tell you this last week I've been working with a company in China on a big trilogy they're setting out there, and I've been consulting with them. And the director we started to have conversations all through translators because it's all in Mandarin. So he's talking to me, and he's just constantly laughing, looking at me, just constantly laughing, and I'm trying to have this kind of conversation that I think I'm being vaguely intelligent about with him. And then the translator says, he's sorry he's laughing, it's just that he can only see Gollum. He can only see Gollum's eyes, and you know, and so it's a testament to what these guys do. Sadly, I'm actually going to grow to look more like Gollum the older I get. I'll never escape that character.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Kevin. I'm actually in a motion capture class right now in my graduate school. And we actually were just talking about you guys the other day. But, so it's great to, you know, watch this and see you guys going into detail. But something that, you know, we are not doing at this stage is going out of the soundstage, out of the motion capture soundstage. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit, you did before, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the system that you guys typically use out there on location. And, you know, I know there's some obvious things that are different about it, but if you could talk about using it on location versus in the studio.
Well, I mean, technically, motion capture is a bunch of cameras with lights around it and reflective markers is the traditional way to do it. And each camera records the motion, and you compute all the triangulation to figure out what the body articulation is. We realized that we can't be throwing our own light into the set because for some reason the VPs don't like that. So we actually we just inverted it and put the emission on the markers themselves and have the cameras just be the receiver. But it requires a lot more gear. So the reason you're probably not going out and doing that is, it's a lot more setup, a lot more gear, there's a lot more cost involved. But other than that, the techniques are the same. So I wouldn't worry about that so much. That's, as I said, that's done out of necessity because we really wanted to create these films that way.
So each setup that you do, each scene or shot in a scene, you basically adjust those cameras as you need to on that location for where the action is going to be.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we'll pretty much, we'll set up, like, we'll watch the rehearsal that Andy and the other actors will do for the scene, and we'll have pre-rigged, drop some cameras in, but then based on where they go, we've kind of focused on that area, move some cameras around, and we'll adjust for that for one setup, and then now if they're going to move on to the next part of the scene and do it over here, we'll shift cameras around.
So you create a new grid basically for
Yeah,
a new shot.
a new volume of coverage, yeah.
Right.
I think we've got time for one more question if anybody wants to. Yeah.
Since you're all pioneering the medium, I'm sorry.
You
Since you're
got
all
it. Yeah.
pioneering the medium, can you talk about where you think you might see it going? Like, is it going to change storytelling from longer format to shorter format as technology catches up, or how you kind of see things moving forward since you've been pioneering it already?
Well, I mean, broadly speaking, I think it changes storytelling, or at least filmmaking, is that it gives directors opportunities to do things, in a way you couldn't do before. I know as we were finishing King Kong, that's when we got the call from Jim Cameron and John Landau, and Jim said, I've been sitting on the script for 10 years because I didn't think anyone could do it. Could you guys take a look at it? And that was Avatar, obviously. Or even this film here, being able to do, bring it into the modern world. When Fox sent me the script for it, as I mentioned before, we knew we didn't want to go back and do anything like a man in a suit. We wanted that total believability. So there's a lot of examples of that are happening more and more. Even with Gollum, we sort of had to crack it that way because the believability is what you needed to make it work. So it's opening up, stories that directors can tell in new ways that you couldn't tell before, and we're always driven by that. we're always interested in the technology, but that's sort of like, we just want to have all these tools ready so we know where someone wants us to take it, but it's really always driven about the story, so we're just looking for the next great story.
And just to add to that very quickly, it's very interesting because your point about actors being taken over by technology, it's sort of the opposite has happened really, and not only that, the platforms are opening up because now we're living in a world where we are shortly going to see storytelling in virtual reality, like really good storytelling in virtual reality, in mixed reality. I mean, there's experimentation going on with using performance capture on the live stage. There's, in television, as well as big movies like this. So actually, it's like saying to actors, look, here's this platform now that you can actually, performance capture sits right in the middle of all of these different new forms of expression, and I think that's so exciting. It really is from an acting point of view. Last one. Oh, so actually, sorry, I'm gonna have to give it to you because you were actually robbed just then. Go on.
Question for you, Andy, to what you were just speaking about. Very curious about your vocal performance. Where you came up with the sound for Caesar's voice, and also were you channeling a little bit of Willem Dafoe in there?
I mean, it comes from my interpretation of what it's like for an ape to force air up through, and to gradually, it's a sort of a found sound and coming from ape vocalization. So it's if that bone in the throat were to sort of evolve into a place where an ape vocalization, because it all starts because in the second film it was a combination of sign language, the way of communicating, sign language, ape vocalizations, and then sort of proto human sounds, and so short staccato bursts of air that are emitted kind of with emotion. So when Caesar goes, no, he's going no, it comes from an ape sort of place, but and then it's, well, how do you then articulate that to, as we were saying in the last film, this one, how do you make that more human? Because the words are much more eloquent in this. So that sort of was the stem of it. That was the base of it.
He does a really good Gollum impression too.
Yeah, that's really good. Wow.
You queuing me up there.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry, very last question.
With all this technology that you guys go through to complete a film and how expensive it is, do you think that, let's say, later, within 10 years from now, something will catch up, or something where it will be affordable for independent films to be able to afford it, have the technology you guys use to do some CGI and stuff like that?
Yeah, that always happens. Look, I was really fortunate when I started off. I think the second film I did was Jurassic Park. I think there's more horsepower on my iPhone right now than we had at the time. So that's, that will always happen. We try to be at the cutting edge because we're trying to tell these new stories, but that will always find its way into something, more usable by more people once you kind of know how to make it work.
Yeah, and it's happening now. I mean, there's some beautiful independent movies that now feature either enhanced characters or fully digital characters. And television has become a really rich environment for compelling stories with lots of digital effects.
I think we're out of time, so thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.